My name is Philip, and I'm hopefully going to show you how to disassemble and reassemble a Lofran's Royal manual windlass. You can see that my windlass here off my sailing boat is a Lofran's Royal. It's about 21 years old. They're made in Monza in Italy, and I believe they're still making them. The problem I had and why I had to take it off the boat was it was completely seized on the anchor chain reel side, so it wasn't turning at all. I have since disassembled it, greased it, and reassembled it, so now I can show you it working properly, and then we'll work backwards from there. So I've left my windlass handle on the boat, but we'll just use a temporary piece of wood, and it's meant to work like this. And you can see as it rotates, as the handle goes backwards and forwards, the anchor chain comes up, and the rope capstan also comes up at the same time, both going in the same direction, no matter which way I push the handle. So that's how it's meant to work. It's quite stiff. They're meant to be quite stiff. You'll see inside later that there's a ratcheting mechanism inside there. But that's how they're meant to work. Mine was not working at all. We had a complete stick on the handle side and complete seize on the chain side here. So hopefully this video will show you what I couldn't quite find on the web. I found some very nice text documents with some nice pictures of people who have done the same thing, and they've also had difficulties, but no one really had a video which I think would maybe help me. Certainly it will help me in 2 years' time. These windlasses should be apparently stripped down every 2 years and re-greased. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it. They're exposed to a lot of salt water. Even here in the Baltic Sea, they're still exposed quite a lot. So let's take you through the process, and bear in mind this is partly for me in 2 years' time when I'll be doing it again. Let's take you through the process of disassembly. I had first thought that this top and bottom, you can see there's top and bottom bolt there. I had thought that perhaps that was to hold in oil. I went to an online forum, All Things Sailing, which is very good, and some of the good people there assured me that it was not the case, that it was for other purposes, and they also provided some other helpful tips as well. But this was a long process, and it took me several days to disassemble it. I had difficulty at several points. So the very first thing to say is don't undo the top and bottom bolts until you're right at the end, and you need to pull out the internal cogs. So step one is removal of the friction screw arm, I guess we'll call it, friction screw handle. If this is working properly, which this is, you can see that the chain the chain roller rolls very smoothly and nicely and allows the chain directly out onto the seabed when you're letting it go. And then when you're finished, you can tighten it up. So that's how it's meant to be working, and this should be operating in this way on the boat. Mine, I had a complete freeze, and I was forced to use a nice rubber mallet to remove this handle first. So that was my first problem. Having got that off, which you can see now it's nice and easy, I was lucky enough to find that the various parts, you can see they're explained in this diagram here. We're talking about the chain end, which is this component here. The various parts just pull out, and the entire, again, I was lucky enough that the entire unit just pulled straight off the spindle. And here's the outer piece, nicely greased, I'll place them in order to make my life easier later when I'm putting them back on. The next was the inner piece. See now that the chain is ready to come off. There's a holding piece underneath here which requires to be removed first. It's the little finger that stops the chain wrapping around itself and allows it to fall directly into the chain locker. So that needs to be removed before this outer ring can come off, before the chain ring can come off the unit. I'll just place those over here. And now, a little bit of luck, the chain ring pops off. It has an internal piece as well that comes out, nicely greased. Mine was fortunately nicely greased, and this came off reasonably easily. I had to use a little bit of effort to get it off, and we'll line it up there, ready for reassembly later. There's also a nice ring involved, ready for a ring to stop any friction happening there. Okay, then we turn to the other end. So we've got one end effectively clear. The other end, the rope end, this is all fairly simple so far because it's obvious I didn't need any books for this one. The rope end has a nice rope capstan. Again, comes off very simply. Now at this point we need to remove the some of these bars, some of these locator bars which are sitting in the tracks here. Remove that. You see him just sits nicely in the track to keep the to stop the capstan there rotating. And we've got one the same on the other side, on the chain side. So both of those removed, and they can be replaced a bit later. They seem to be about the same size, so it doesn't seem to matter which one you use. Right, my next problem was removing this wheel. You can see now it removes, it should remove quite nicely if I give a little bit of encouragement. I had a problem, I wasn't able to remove it and had to use instead, you can see it's got two locator pins, locator bars either side, and what I had to do to remove this was to in fact push this entire bar through to the other side to get rid of it, which is difficult given that it's got the it's got a circlip on there. Anyway, we're eventually able to remove that by using a little bit of heat, and now we're down to a reasonable size proposition here. These two pins also need to be removed. Smaller locator pins, they're in fairly tight. One, two. See, they're smaller ones, and they've got little notches on them to make them stay in. And then we've got a circlip, and we've got the rope side as well. Now on the rope side, this is where I had the first difficulty. These hex bolts were not removing. So the easiest way I found to online, again, there was very good commentary by someone who suggested that I heat them. So I used a small blowtorch, something like one of these, and just heated around the plate surrounding the nut. I actually I started with a small blowtorch and ended up with a larger one, and then moved on to an impact driver. And the impact driver, together with its 4mm hex key by tapping that with a hammer, a heavy hammer, was able to remove all of these pins, all of these nuts. Now, you don't want to, the advice I again got from the web was you don't want to break these. That's fairly good advice. It took a little while. It took about 2 minutes of heating of each one before I could break the seal with the impact wrench. If I tried to use just a normal hex key, something like one of these, it would have in fact ripped the thread out of the center. It still would have, some of them would have undone and some of them would have been ripped and would have had to be drilled out, which is not what you want. That's why the impact driver is probably a better tool for that particular job. Okay, so seeing I've already taken this apart before, I can fairly easily and quickly remove it, and hopefully in 2 years' time when I'm removing this, I'll have exactly the same fortune, but the whole thing will just fall apart nicely if I do it in the correct order, as I'm doing now. And hopefully, if you've got it right and you're lucky and you take the last pin out, this cover, the plate cover, will just pop off. If not, if it's welded to the, you can see there's a plastic collar. If it's welded to the plastic collar, that makes life a lot more difficult. I was lucky on, this is, remember, the rope side, and on the rope side I was lucky enough to find that the cog in here, which I can now remove, I was lucky enough to find that that cog, with a little bit of persuasion, came off nice and clean. If it doesn't, you're going to have to beat it through, and which I had to do with the rod on the other side. So we'll put that back in together to sit and wait. On the inside, you'll find the entire brass rod is now ready to come out. Now, the brass rod contains the internal pieces, and again, shouldn't need to take off. The internal gears will come with it. You shouldn't need to take off the top and bottom screws yet. In theory, this brass rod with a little ring on it will just easily pop through, and I must admit I had to use a sledgehammer and some blocks of wood to put it on the ground and was able to knock it through. Now of course it comes quite nicely and easily, but originally that took quite a lot of beating to get that through. But when it comes out, you've got a nice sealed unit. Inside I had no problem with corrosion, so I've pulled that apart. You can see that it's quite intricately put together. Inside you've got a locator bar there which can be removed for greasing. You've got another ring inside there which is presumably to stop the two going too close together. You've got more collars, and these two ratcheting cogs should be kept on the same side that they are. They're not the same as each other. They're not symmetrical, and there's a reason for that I can't really explain, but there's a good engineering reason why that operates to make the cogs turn the windlass in the same direction regardless of which way you're turning the handle. So we can set that aside, pull that apart, grease it, put it back together. So having taken that out, I'll put that little ring back on the end, I don't want to lose that. Having taken that out, I really thought that was the end of my problems. And all I needed to do then was to remove these top and bottom cogs, which they did come off quite easily. The screws were a little bit stuck, but they did remove reasonably easily. But you can see now that they're held in quite lightly by their simple cog here, their simple bolt, which ends in a non-threaded non-threaded rod here. And you can see that simply rotates. And it doesn't seem to matter top or bottom, they appear identical. They seem to work perfectly fine, identical. Now, at this point, I really thought my problems were over and that all I had to do was remove the circlip, and then I would have a perfectly functioning, still closed, open but perfectly functioning unit. You can see it turns now, but this was the problem, that I found that the seize had occurred exactly where this cog slips into the body. So the very first trick is to use a circlip plier to remove the circlip. That's easier said than done, but with a little bit of persuasion and getting the circlip plier in, you can see it's just a plier with a special fingers on the end. Using that together with some sort of tool to ply it out. There we are, we've got one side coming out, the other side coming out, all the way around, hopefully. With a little bit of persuasion, it will tend to come off. You can skip forward to the point where I've got this off. I'm just going to keep going until it is off. It'll take me another minute or so. Maybe a pair of pliers will help the other side. Remember that in my case it was completely seized, so I wasn't able to rotate it, and I suspect that might be possible with yours. I've seen written reports of people with a seize on the rope side, so you could have a seize on either side, or you may have a seize on both sides, in which case you're going to have difficulty getting these out. But anyway, the circlip removal is the first element. And a little bit of persuasion, he's just about coming off. I'll have to put him back on in another minute or so, so there we go. So I was left with this particular problem, that I had a complete seize here and I wasn't sure how to get it out. Wasn't even sure whether there was anything else to be removed to get it out. But based on the diagram and using a little bit of heavy hitting, I've managed to find a size 28 socket and placed it on the end here in order to stop any burring. I don't want to hurt the soft magnesium aluminium alloy here. I was able to lay this down onto a block of wood and tap it through. When I say tap, I mean use a full-size sledgehammer, pretty much with an overhead grip to get it off. I had to put a lot of effort into getting that apart, and I really thought I might break it, but it did eventually come apart, if that's any consolation to you if you're trying to do the same thing. So eventually came out, and you can see that on the inside all it is another plastic collar, and a plastic collar on the inside of that as well, so plastic collar inside and out. I then had to get off the corrosion around the inside of this plate, and the corrosion inside the collar, and the corrosion on, I'll use a new glove here, get the corrosion off everywhere I could, and that took quite a lot of sanding, and I used in the end some sort of sanding device, a block on a piece of wood, which would turn and sand the inside of this collar, and sand. I'd used quite a lot of wet and dry paper on this to get it down, because the action of the corrosion is such that it expands underneath the plastic and then blocks the unit inside. So to put it back together, it's merely reversing the process. I'll keep going with this, but if you feel confident, you can stop now. But the simple reversal of the process, which took me a little bit of time, because it took a couple of days to pull it apart, or a few days to pull it apart, and by that point in time I'd forgotten which was the recommended method for putting it together. So here you can see we are trying to put it back together. And very simply that should slot on, circlip, and then we reverse the process. Pushing on. There we are, a little bit of persuasion. This circlips on all the way around. Nicely greased. So we've got the inner cog, got the chain cog on, and then we place these two inners. Now these two inners, if you remember, you can place the bottom or the top first, it doesn't matter. I did try to put it together without placing these inner cogs first, and that just doesn't work at all. You really need to place them in. You can see the way they sit there quite nicely. Once they're screwed in, they don't even need to be screwed in hard. They will sit there happily waiting for the next cog to come in. You don't have to have a complicated mess of things going inside. This is probably the most important bit for me to remember, is how to, the order in which to pull it apart and put it back together. Right. Once that's on, then the inner can go through, and remembering that we're dealing this end with the chain. We've got the cover plate on this end. Sorry, the cover plate on this end has the chain, and that has the screw thread. So the chain and the screw thread and the cover plate all go on the same end. The other end is blank for the rope. So providing you've reassembled this piece, the central spindle correctly, and even placed that little cover plate there, and placed him through, the whole thing will hopefully cooperate. Now he's stuck. Take him out again. Got to make sure that these two central ratcheting cogs are sitting on their spline, so I don't want to push them too far in. I'll just go in gently there, take it all the way through. There we are. And now we're tucked in. I've got that little brass washer on that end. And this end is nicely greased up, ready for the next cog. Next cog goes over and holds in. And you can see there's some action on the spring. And then very simply, the plate comes back on. I'm ignoring the hours and hours of cleaning and greasing that goes on. I'm sure you can work out how to do that. And at this point, we're ready to put the screws back in, I believe, unless I've forgotten anything. No, I think we're ready for the screws. And then later on we can deal with the rest of those locators. So, put the screws back in. Don't think they have to be on very hard. The seal on this is more about getting a seal with the lubricant. So some nice heavy grease I've used. It's gone a little bit hard. I've used some lithium grease. In fact, I'll take that one out and start again. Careful with the clutch settings on this. I don't want to screw that in too hard. And then we should be ready to start replacing these little small locator bars. Now I found I had to replace them by hammering them. Get them in straight. The other one on the other side. There are 4 holes for the locators there, but only 2 of them seem to be the correct size. I'm not sure of the purpose of the other 2 holes. Okay, that's it. Once they're in, we can place these other 2 bars in. They go in quite easily. Then all we need to do is to replace the mechanism. So remember, on the screw side, we've got the chain winch itself, and I've kept these together. They're all greased. Let's pop that on. We've got the friction plate on the outside, and then the screw. Screws it nice and easily. We've got a nice turn there, and the friction will stop it, so that all works. On the other side, we've got the handle plate, let's see which way it's going to go. Yeah. Right, it's on. And you can see I've put a fair amount of grease here to try to insulate this from any water damage. Finally, this plate goes on here. I don't seem to have any spare screws at this point. Screw goes in. Being the 3rd time I've done this, I've tried to make a video before and it didn't. I seem to have video problems. Being the 3rd time I've reassembled this, it gets easier and easier. And however, it's not something I'm going to do every week. It's something that hopefully I'm going to do every 2 years. Last but not least, we need to get this, I don't know what I'll call it, the finger plate. The little finger that stops the chain wrapping around itself. Put that back in. You can see I've got corrosion on the body. This is really the only place where there's any corrosion. I might take that off and show you. This is really the only place on the unit that's really damaged. You can see the corrosion on the bottom corner of that block. and that corrosion is just caused by the steel finger and the screw making a contact and forming an electrical chemical circuit with the body. So wherever you've got steel touching alloy, you end up with a circuit. We try to separate those, and the manufacturer certainly tries to separate those if they can. So this little finger sitting there nicely. Try to separate those, but that's not always possible. Okay, so let's see, have we reassembled it correctly? Do up these screws, these spindles, that's what they are, they're the central spindle rods for the internal cogs. They just do up like that. Put a little rubber ring on them to give them some sort of seal. They don't need to be done tightly, so I figured a little ring would just help. Originally I think they came with some sort of washer, but that's long gone. Presumably this has been taken on and off several times. Although I suspect it's been the first time it's been pulled down in its life completely. Now, if we've got all that correct, and we've got the screw done up at the other end, which it is, that will do. And hopefully we grab our little pretend lever. Yep, as we turn it, it's doing exactly what it's meant to do. So, hopefully I will remember that in 2 years' time when it comes to pulling it down. Hopefully, if you've had a similar winch, I'm told they're quite common, and hopefully you've got some benefit out of my many mistakes. Thanks for watching.